everyone. Sorry we started a bit late. Ooh, that's not what I want to see. Great. Can I get a show of hands, anyone here who's already in user experience? A big show of hands. Okay. Big show of hands, who doesn't know what it is? All right, why aren't you at the front? All right. And big show of hands who thinks they know what it is but isn't sure. I like you people better. Okay, it's good. So what we're going to talk today about is basically product design, and everything we're doing now in the digital space, we should be thinking of it in terms of a product. So whether we're providing a service offering, it's still, we think about a product that's going to live ongoing. So that's why we're talking here about product design. So the main thing I talk about in user experience is about building empathy. So today it's product design with impact through empathy. Excuse the transitions. We did a last minute change to PowerPoint, so we're back in the 70s. So, so what's behind a product? So a product, obviously there's something built to fulfill a need, and we've got tangible needs, like what must it do? And then we've got the intangible needs, which is where we play a lot of in the user experience space. So for those of you that are sitting 4 kilometres in the back there, you probably can't see on the left here, we've got a shoe made out of an old tyre. On the right, we've got the Christian Louboutin, other end of the spectrum. Both of them fulfill the same primal need. On the right there, we've got a different sort of need. And the reason I pulled that one out is because of the red sole. Obviously, there's something else that it fulfills there, is that you need to be able to know exactly what brand of shoe I'm wearing from a greater distance than normal. So if you think about what, I'm sure all the ladies in the house are going to go, that's not what it's about, Henry. Well, we can argue about that later. So good products, if you do it right, can create habits. That's really where we as businesses want to start to play. So some interesting stats, 79% of smartphone owners look at their phones within 15 minutes. So who here would agree with that? Who's within 10 minutes? 5? Immediately? Okay. So, this is where we could get to if we do things right. Whether this is right is questionable, and we'll see that in a second. So, great products can inspire emotion. So that's the second thing that we'll be looking at there, creating habits, feeling good about the thing. I just, sorry to pick on shoes, but it wasn't hard to Google I love shoes and find about 10 million images that would match that. This is just one. And, but love can go too far, right? So, yeah, I always get that response with this slide. Just so I can make it gender balanced, I bought a pair of shoes recently that are I really like them, but they're about 1.5 sizes too big. But I look like a clown, but they, you can do things beyond what is actually sensible. So, it's not just a bleeding foot. That's not actually my ex-girlfriend, but my ex-girlfriend was somewhat like that. And amazing products are indispensable. So those of you who put their hand up and we said, yep, straight away, that's the sort of space we're looking at there. And here's a frightening statistic. 33% of Americans say they would rather give up sex than lose their cell phone. Could be doing it wrong, don't know. But so how do I get great? So you've probably heard a lot of noise these days in your fast companies, or design thinking is a big thing now. It's not a new thing really, and anyone from the user-centered design sort of space has been operating in this area for a long time. If you come from a traditional industrial design area, you've been working in this space for a long time, but people like IDEO helped formalize the practice. And Where it's got big now is that it's actually been pushed not just from a design practice perspective, but from a business perspective and from an engineering perspective. So you have the whole enterprise solution tech side of businesses doing design thinking as part of their new way, not just the designers. You have executive levels, and the leadership teams all going through design thinking so that they can change their frame. Is there, just out of interest, is anyone running design thinking here?
Yes.
Yeah?
We have a human-centered design.
Okay. And who's been involved? 8 people? Good. It's always hard in Australia to get people to put their hands up. So what is it? So Wikipedia, design thinking stands for design-specific cognitive activities that designers applied during the process of designing. That's not super helpful. Now I'm done. That's all right. Okay, so that's not super helpful. When we think design thinking, we might be thinking things like this: the super elaborate customer journey map. You pay some consultants. That's probably the large format deliverable that seems to equal. It's pretty big. You just print it out on A1 continuous paper. That makes it worth the $2 million you paid. We're moving away from an output-based thought into a process-based thought. So one of the things about design thinking is understanding the system entirely. So if you want to deliver something faster to your users, your customers, but you're actually putting additional stress on the people that deliver that, ultimately that's going to probably fail. So when you think about delivering value to your end users, you have to think about how value moves throughout the entire process, not just from the salesperson and the cash transaction, but the whole thing. So I was talking to a gentleman yesterday about why iBeacons aren't doing very well, let's say, to be nice, at all. And one of the impacts is if you look at high turnover businesses like retail, if I have a business and I need to teach my staff, which have a high turnover of staff, how to deal with the different payment mechanism other than the till, which may change, and it's going to change for them if they go from place to place. It's an additional overhead on me, and it's additional overhead on them, and everyone will probably just revert back to what they know. So when you think about the whole process, not just from the consumer and the business, it creates a different understanding. Also, we look at the touch points. So we kind of just talked about that. Let's say you've got, I get online here and I take out insurance, and I get an email. But what next? When's the next time I hear from you? Do I get something in the mail? Do I get a phone call? Or is it just, yay, origination, see you later, and once a year? So what sort of interactions do you have with the business, and where? Is it on the phone? Is it on the mobile internet? Is it in person? How does that experience come about? So that's very important. One of the key things is, and we just sort of touched on that, is how does value move through the system? So understanding what the value, and this is where Toyota got good with Kaizen, is empowering the individuals to change the process. That's a very big part of it. You might hear it labelled a few different things. There's design thinking as a practice. Then you also hear CX, customer experience, service design. These broadly all mean the same sort of thing. And we can use traditional or lean methods. So traditional methods are more of the big bang, big upfront design, we sort of term it, and lean is more building the bike while we're riding it. So we may not go and do a massive research up front. We might start designing and making sure that we're validating it on a weekly or fortnightly basis. So we start running, we take more and more measurements. So the important thing about lean and agile to an extent as well is, especially lean UX, is it's the speed of learning. So the faster we can learn, the better. So we need something to test. But I think all of that kind of misses the point, hopefully, because that's what my talk's about. Design thinking is about people. And I chose this image specifically because I don't know who you are in this picture, and I don't know who the audience is. So, you know, it's very important to get to know your customers quite deeply. You've got to understand what their problems are, and problems aren't absolute. The example I've been rattling out recently is, if I've got a stone in my shoe, it's a problem. If I'm at home, I'll probably take my shoe off and take the stone out. If I'm walking down George Street in peak hour on the way to work, I'm probably not going to take my shoe off, even though it's the same problem, but there's other things that interact with that. So there's a strength of problem, and that's something that is often overlooked when we're designing products. Someone goes, hey, I've identified a problem. Is that problem big enough for me to do anything? And I mean anything. You know, we've all probably built lots of products where we think, if you did this, it would be simpler. But the user's like, yeah, but I have to do something to start off with. So, you know, if I schedule a payment, that means I don't have to worry about it. Yeah, but then I have to schedule it. But the payoffs, you don't have to ever do it ever again. So friction is something we need to understand in relation to problems. How are they feeling? So this idea, anyone heard of this concept of moment of truth? Yeah. So, you know, it's one thing when I buy insurance from you, you know, for travel insurance, I'm probably excited, I'm probably happy, you know, let's work on that because I'm going overseas. If I'm claiming, you have to be a whole other better person to deal with me then, because I'm stressed, angry, frightened, all sorts of things. So how people are feeling is very important. Where are they? So we're living in a mobile world now. Where they are contextually is very important. Things like privacy now are very nuanced in people's understanding and belief. We've done a lot of research in that area, and it's suffice to say it is not logical at all. So people have, to the extent where people have the belief that if I use my mobile phone at home, it's more secure from a hacking perspective than if I was out in the street. Not really true at all, but doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be true. It's how people feel. So, who do they talk to for advice? So something we can forget in a digital world is that there's someone in the other room. There's their mate to call. There's a lot of other people that can influence them. And to that degree, who do they trust? So are you someone they trust, or are they looking elsewhere for trust? So are you only the person that's telling me that you've got a product, but now I have to go off somewhere? It doesn't matter what else you do now to tell me that you're the best. You've got Canex, 5-star rating, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't matter. I want to go to someone else. Okay, so you need to understand that and not necessarily fight it all the time, which is something we tend to do. And then who are you? So often developing software, we actually forget that we're supposed to be someone in that experience. So I often say in my workshops, you know, think about who the application replaces. We're going to look at some sort of personal health things here and think about, are you the coach? Are you the friend? Are you the drill sergeant? Who are you in that experience? What way do we converse with people? And ultimately, that's what customer experience is about. Oh, nice one. And therefore, how will you treat them? So that comes back to, are you the drill sergeant? Am I the stick? Am I the carrot? How do I work? Okay, so the way I like to sum up design thinking is like this. Design thinking is a human-centered design process that ensures we engage people with maximum empathy to create connection and loyalty. So, you know, what does that sound like? That sounds like a good friend, right? And that's where you want to get to. So how do we do it? So these steps are probably not crazy for people in the user-centered design process already. But the steps we need to go through are build empathy and understanding. Then we do some sort of analysis to help define the problem. We'll go through all this in a second. Ideate, which is probably the people that, if you're from a more design-oriented background, that's where you lie. You focus a lot on ideation and may not be with research. We've got to work out what we can. Well, to test something, we need to build it. So obviously prototyping is important, and then we need to test it. So, this is really my focus today, as you've probably worked out. And I tried to communicate this in a way that would resonate with you. So empathize is to understand the plight of our users at a deeply human level. So that means really, really, really try and understand what it would be like to be them. How are they feeling? What's the stresses? What's their things that aren't logical, but it's going to affect them? It's key to delivering better products. So when I talk about this idea of developing, let's say, a personal health app, a lot of what you would see happen in the past is, and my pet hate when people say UX, they think UI, and so they're all focused here. Ooh, what does it look like, right? So we need to change our focus to who is it for. So who are these people that look like they're trying to get some kind of health benefit versus these people that seem like they're going to be after something, potentially quite different. And what about these cats? What's going on with the coach? Is he getting paid? Is he doing it for free? Why is he giving up his time for free? Is his son there? Does he, was he a college hopeful that went nowhere? What's the real driver between all of these people? And what's happening here? And it's amazing what you can kind of get from photos is hopefully immediately building some sort of empathy there, which is why I think they're quite powerful. You really don't know what's happening here, right? And it probably would reflect on your personality, I would suggest, if you say, well, he's telling him job well done, he's telling him you can do it, he's telling him you don't have to do it if you don't want to. It's something that we would have to probe. And then my favourite, what's happening here? So this is an interesting one because this is about shared success, but not completely shared. There's something going on here. Someone's more happy than the other person. If you're not up close, then sorry, you can't see that. So empathy's ability to blur the line between yourself and others. It's very important to understand that empathy is not sympathy. It's not compassion. That's quite a good definition of it. So I think just be aware that it's not about feeling sorry for people. It's about understanding them. It's very hard to find a photo of for empathy on the internet because it's not really often not quite right. So how do we do it? I'm going to whiz through some of these bits because I know we're kind of short on time, but there's three main ways that we do it. Immersion, observation, and then engagement. So you might, the latter two are the things we probably would work in more. The first one is more interesting from my perspective. So engagement is direct. That's surveys, that's interviews, that could be contextual inquiries or ethnographic studies. Observation is where I'm a little bit, I'm less in the way, so I just sit back and watch the way you do your tasks. That's probably actually more in the ethnographic studies where I just watch how you do things. Something you'll find when you start to do research is what people tell you they do and what they do are completely different. We've just had been out to some contextual inquiries and had a guy saying, yeah, I'm very, very security conscious. I'm very worried about it. And pulls out his A4 sheet with every password to everything that he's got, right? Just by his laptop. So that, they don't always meet. So that's why observation is often a better tool than direct engagement. Immersion, the great example here is when IDEO was trying to design some products for senior citizens. So what they had as a challenge there was for their designers to know what that felt like. So what they did was they Vaselined up their glasses, They put on gardening gloves and they had unstable shoes, and they tried to navigate kitchens and cooking with those impedances, so they could sort of get a feeling what it would be like to start losing your balance, what it would be like to start losing your fine motor skills, what it would be like to start losing your vision, and get to really live and breathe that, so you can see how that would really drive empathy. And the sort of deliverables that we would get out of that are things like empathy maps, story maps, stakeholder maps, the customer journey map for $3 million, as I told you, you get that one as well, if you're good. I won't go into much detail with these. It's just that's a customer journey map about people's relationship to the home buying process and mortgage brokers. As you can see, they're always enormous, hard to read on anything except for a wall. But they're very good. They do actually help people understand, but they're quite difficult. I mean, they have things like this is the sentiment of how the people looking for a home loan are feeling, you know, excitement then drops as they find out, oh, we can't actually buy as much as we thought even though we got approved, and how their feelings move, how their feelings towards the broker change over time, their problems, verbatims. There's a whole lot of detail in there, but too much perhaps. These sort of things, stakeholder maps, which tell you the sort of relationships that everyone has to each other, whether it may just be, well, I've got a financial relationship with that person, I trust them because they're my family, that's a colleague that I work with, but I trust their opinion, you know, so it starts to point out the influence, and as you can imagine, you know, often we are out here, like you have to deal with me because you've got my money or you insure me, but do I actually trust you, or are you in my inner circle in any sort of way? Surprisingly, mortgage brokers just got right in there. Well, surprisingly to me, maybe not to the mortgage brokers. And empathy maps are something that we use in our lean workshops to try and generate a lot of insights quickly. We can either use them from research or provisionally, i.e. we just come up with it. And then we'll test them, so we'll develop provisional personas out of that. Okay, so define, and this in some ways is where, I shouldn't say where the magic happens, but it's where you hope the magic happens potentially. Define is when you discover some insight. So I define it here as when we read the story of our users, what is the twist in the plot that reveals the real problem that they are facing? So, you know, when you're reading a book and you think you know what's going to happen, and then you get the surprise, that's what you're trying to look for with research. Because we all have our preconceptions. We all have, and not only do we have it, but our competitors have it, right? And unless we can find something that's actually significant and different and not understood as yet, then we won't be able to really design our products in any significantly different way. So the core thing here is, you know, knowing who our users are from our empathy, understanding what their needs are, and then trying to work out what the insight is. And so that's not, you know, users want to pay their bills, users want insurance, you know, users want travel insurance so that when they go overseas that they don't lose out. It would be, well, it would be something that you hadn't expected in that particular realm. And I guess those global nomads, you know, they're obviously onto something there. If you're aware of them, they've kind of done a big twist on travel insurance. It's just an insurance product, right? But the way that they've framed everything around it is more around the travel than it is around the insurance. It's about the fun and the experience of travel and creating a community of young travellers that's made them quite successful. And we call that, when we get there, we call that a point of view. So a specific user needs to do something because of the surprising insight. Surprising insight here is that Keynote doesn't translate that well into PowerPoint. That's probably not that surprising, is it? So if we look back at these photos, we would be trying to extract some kind of insight here. In the workshops I've run in the past here, there's been a lot of talk, well, is this about exercise? Or is it about meeting people? So trying to understand, well, what would be the social aspect of designing a gym if you were designing a physical space? So maybe there is a real need to make sure that there can be interactions between people. Maybe that's why they have the bikes overlooking things. You have to understand that it's not just about getting fit. What are these people's needs? And we talked about this a little bit before, that they're all obviously different. I think it'd be interesting to know what the coach's unmet needs are. Especially when people give up their time for free, you'd have to think what's driving that. Yeah, my crazy friends. So ideate, this is often where a lot of design has started in the past. That's obviously a problem because you have no background. You're just like, I think I'm being creative because I'm thinking lots of stuff. And that's where a lot of us start from, a traditional design background before understanding user-centered design. Business people, very guilty of it. I use the iPad. I reckon we should do this. It's in no way backed up by research or validated. It's just sometimes it's called the hippo idea. Have you heard of that one? Highest paid person's opinion. So, that's certainly out there. But it's the fun bit. That's when we come up with lots and lots of ideas. The idea is to have unfiltered ideas just to see if something strange comes up. We run workshops where we encourage the stealing of ideas from each other. So if we break up into 4 teams, ideate, review, critique, steal, and try and make the good ideas flourish throughout the room and grow, sort of like an evolutionary design process. Sounded good, didn't it? And this idea of how might we, and there's lots of different techniques here. How might we do this? There's an interesting one called the time-traveling designer. Has anyone heard of that? Where they might try and design, what would this be like in 10 years in the future? So what would, looking back, if we didn't have any constraints, what would happen? And then try and extrapolate back from there. So in this one, I've kind of given away the game here, but how would we enable accidental social interactions in a gym environment? How do we facilitate that? And a lot of gyms now have little cafes, for example. And create something that we can test. So obviously we can't test anything if we don't have anything. And lots of things we can test. My favourite at the moment is early stage storyboards. So instead of, giant customer journey map for $3 million, 20 minutes with some Sharpies and post-it notes, and we can get something quite decent to try and validate with users and iterate on quite quickly. So we'll have a look at that. Sketch wireframes and interactive prototypes. The way that we work is everything is sketch. Well, we're in a sketch stage for the longest time. And then when we think that we've sort of got it right, then we'll go to a high fidelity interactive prototype. But we try and keep everything as loose as possible. The reason for that is when it's a sketch and you say, I think X, or not really I think X, but I don't believe that would be right, or there's been some user feedback, or for whatever reason you say, look, we can't architecturally do that. I don't get in a big huff and go, oh, but I just spent 15 hours in Visio or OmniGraffle or Photoshop or whatever else, because I didn't. I just was scribbling. So if we reduce that attachment to artifacts, we get much better innovation because people are much more fluid with their ideas then. So storyboards like this, some of my students. This one was for anti-bullying app. What we really do with this sort of thing is make it a story. So the important thing is that it's a narrative. I always reinforce that because we have an innate sense of storytelling, and when a story doesn't ring true, we have a better sense of identifying where that doesn't ring true than if you just had a whole bunch of flowcharts. And again, going back to the customer journey map, some excellent infographics. In this story, the little Johnny's getting bullied on a bus and he pulls out his app to try and deal with bullying. Obviously, that's rubbish straight away, right? So that's all right, he was a student. but it sort of obviates that quite quickly because it just doesn't ring true. Whereas that might not have been so clear if you didn't have the context, the environment, all the feeling in there. And it doesn't have to be anywhere near as good as this. This was a visual design student, so I've stacked the deck a little bit here. Sketch wireframes, that's good enough. And obviously then test. So, let's get it wrong with ourselves before we get it out there and get it wrong. We can also get it out there and get it wrong as well, but that takes more of a sense of confidence from organisations to do that. There's lots of different sorts of lots of different sorts of testing we can do as well. So there's concept testing that we should really do, and what is often lacking in organisations as well. As I said, you get a great idea. It does solve a problem. So we've identified that a problem exists. We all agree that that problem exists. Someone comes up with a solution. We think, well, we've done a lot of research. We understand the person. We agree that that's a problem. Therefore, the solution must be right. That's unfortunately not true, or we'd all be sitting here millionaires, right? Because that would be as simple as it would be, but it's actually not the case. So any concept that we have to solve something, we need to understand that more deeply as well. And as I said, there's a strength to a problem. And that's something that a lot of startups have to deal with, is that, yes, you identify the problem. Is it big enough for me to get my wallet out of my pocket? Is it big enough for me to get off my seat? People are incredibly lazy, and you can't underestimate that. Usability testing should be quite clear to everyone. It's just really about finding out if people can use things. Hands up who doesn't know about usability testing. That's a bit loaded, wasn't it? No one's going to go. All right, hands up who hasn't done or observed usability testing. Okay, that's cool. It's not common, right? And concierge testing. Anyone heard of that? That's where I bluff it. So concierge testing, I think Menulog. Not sure if they still are, but anyone use Menulog? So Menulog's an online service for ordering food from restaurants, and they bluffed it to start off with. The website comes in, I get an order, they ring up the restaurant and go, hey, and they place the order. So it's, in your head it's an automated system. In reality, it's the automated is some dude. But that's a lot cheaper than building a system. And if you can't get to your audience to start off with, it doesn't matter how good your system is. So that's a very lean way of testing an idea. And then, of course, we iterate. How are we going for time? Ooh, I'm going to run early. Okay, so a really good example of this, and you should check out this story. It's about Laura Esserman. She's a doctor. Who works in oncology, specifically breast cancer. And she was very disappointed about the care that the patients were getting. So, I don't know, anyone been to hospital recently? Yeah. It's not a great experience. It's actually an awful experience. Anyone been to emergency recently? I've been a lot this year with my family's been, different stratas have been there. It's an awful experience. You don't know what's going on. You're just left in the dark. It's a very, very bad service. That being said, save people's lives. So there's different goals going on here. My family's doctors, so we have vigorous debates about that. From the doctor's perspective, you're bleeding, you're in pain, doesn't matter. Not urgent, not life-threatening, not going to get worse. So you're at the bottom of the tree. Okay, so it doesn't feel like that should be that way for you. You've got a big gash down your arm, it hurts like hell. You've broken your arm, hurts like hell. It's, maybe a break is one step up from that, but from the customer's perspective, it's not great. So anyway, what she did was she was unhappy with the care that cancer patients were getting. And what she realised was basically patients would come into the clinic, potentially with a lump, and they would just get the runaround. They would come in, they'd see someone, then they'd get sent over to radiology. They'd have to wait there, which would not be in the same building, by the way. Then they would have to go back to the first doctor. First doctor would have to wait for the report. It could take a couple of days, and then when they did find out something wrong, then they'd know something is wrong, but not have any sort of treatment plan, and just a high stress environment for the patient. So she wasn't happy with that. If you look at this, I mean, you can tell that she's obviously quite empathetic. She's not a designer, she's a doctor. So what I'm trying to get at here is this doesn't have to be a design skill. It's just it's an innate skill that we can all have. So, while this is talking about design, it's not just for designers. So she obviously had empathy with her patients. What she realised is everyone was doing a good job. So every single person in that organisation, you're a great radiologist, you're doing the best that you can do, you're a great oncologist, you're a great counsellor. Everyone as individuals is doing a good job, but the system is failing. So that was where, if you look at system design or you start to look at service design or user experience or customer experience as a whole, that the system was failing everyone, not the individual parts. And that was her big finding, obviously, that the system was a mess, and she looked into why that was. In the States, a lot of hospitals are run out of universities, and much like us here, there's fighting over funding, and so everyone's fighting for real estate, and we're not necessarily related. So oncology department might be the Department of Medicine, but radiology might be, something completely different. It might be radiology, imaging, completely different arms. So their funding comes from a different bucket. There are different governance. They don't talk, even though they should be an integrated service. So she looked at the process and she defined what she thought would be the ideal process. And she defined also this idea of a destination statement. So this is a little bit like the time-travelling designer, something to rally everyone behind. So she came up with this statement. What if there were a breast care clinic where a woman worried about a lump could walk in at the beginning of the day and walk out at the end of the day with an answer, either knowing that it was a lump or no problem, and if there was a lump, having a care plan. So that was her vision. And she worked very, very hard to do a very small trial that operated, I think it was 1 or 2 days a week in the area. So she convinced different people. So she had to go, at a very small level, one radiologist, one chemo person, to all grab together and run it as a trial. And it was massively successful. It's kind of, when you hear it, it's not a surprise that it was successful. But you can imagine the sort of red tape that she had to fight through. So the number of patients growing from 175 to 1,300 per week. So that's obviously a good sign of success. From a business perspective, it was a major revenue source, so that they eventually scaled up the whole thing and created a whole, well, I shouldn't say wing, but area. And then when she realised that the radiologists weren't in there, she gave back some of her space, which everyone was quite surprised, because no one ever does that in the university. If someone's given you some budget, she gave it back. But for her, it was more important that the service actually operated as a whole than it was that, I've got room to stretch out my legs. So that's what design thinking can do for you as a business and for people as individuals. I've run a little bit early, so I'm happy to take questions, or I can talk about behaviour design, but I think that's maybe a good time for questions. I know you probably all have to run off to meetings. Thoughts?
We've got time for questions.
Yep.
I might start with a question that maybe some people here have, is they're not currently working in product design or service design, what are the practical takeaways? What would you advise people who feel that they're just a cog in the system? Any other questions?
So, I mean, I think, again, I guess if you think of yourself like that, then you're probably not going to get anywhere, are you? I mean, and the business needs to empower everyone. So if you think of, that the Kaizen model and what Toyota did is saying that you're just painting the car. If I just said, look, I don't have any impact on the quality of the car, I just paint it, then you won't get anywhere. But if you actually take some of that responsibility, I mean, Dr. Esserman, if she just said, look, I am just the clinician, I don't have any control over the radiologist, then nothing would happen. So you have to take some steps yourself, definitely, to talk to whoever you need to, get a better understanding of the process. It's about self-empowerment and then trying to get that buy-in around you. So I don't think there's like a skill that you can have. It's one making sure that you've got a good understanding, but first of all, it's taking some responsibility for yourself in the system.
So it's a little bit about, empower yourself.
Yeah.
And, let your passion manifest itself.
Yeah, I think that's always a good thing, right? If you think of yourself as, this is psychologists now are going to have field day with me, but if you think of yourself as a victim in the system, or if you think of like stuff happens to me, then there's very little opportunity for you to make any change. Yeah.
Questions, guys? Okay, over here. Thanks.
I was just wondering how long it might take to go from the empathize through the various stages you described. I know that's probably not an easy thing to answer because you'd have different examples, but maybe just a couple of examples is how long it is taken to get to that prototype and testing stage.
So, I mean, it can, from an enterprise perspective, we've gone through that to market in 4 months. So that's everything. So from an enterprise level, that's quite fast. So we're talking, so the whole anti-UX thing in the past has been, it takes too long. We don't have time for research. We've got time to get it wrong, though. We've got time to lose money and offend people, but we don't have time to actually know them better. But, we really push a sort of lean UX methodology now. And once you've got your systems in place and you're fully committed, then you can be very fast. As I said, 4 months we've delivered, award-winning innovative software in that time period. Test every 2 weeks, rain, hail or shine, so moving. The important thing, especially with that, is we reduce the amount of sort of navel gazing. It is possible to get in a research sort of coma where you feel like you're seeing more and more questions in front of you, and you're just sort of stuck like a bunny in the headlights. I'm dealing with a bit of that with some folks that I'm working with at the moment, and cracking the whip. I should put a carrot there somewhere, but kind of just cracking the whip, because you have to define what do we know, what's an insight, what insight actually has a design impact. So, a stupid example that I've been using, and once I say stupid examples, I can't stop using them. But if we found out, for instance, that people buy super when they're wearing red socks, it's great news. But there's nothing that we can do about that, and there's nothing that, from a design perspective, for your website that we would change. So it's information, but it's not actionable. So it's you have to work very quickly to see things that can be actionable and what can't. Does that answer your question?
Okay.
Yeah, as a flip side, I guess, to that enterprise question, if we're part of a small team and developing software and iterating on it as quickly as we can, and we'd like to practice a lot of the fantastic, practices that you can. But what would be some of the short? What are some of what are the quick fixes? What are the things we can do right now to sort of start implementing these types of things?
How can I lose weight without exercising or eating less?
Yeah, and 6 weeks or less. Yeah. Where's the magic pill? Do you have a pill that you sell?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess one of the strong things is really focus on learning. So if you feel like you really need to deliver software, or your investors will lose your mind, or your team will lose your mind, just understand that you need to give yourself the grace to say, this is of a level of certainty, but I think it's probably wrong. Understand what your assumptions are. I didn't go deeply into sort of a lean UX process at all, or a lean startup process where we have a Kanban with assumptions and hypotheses and all those sorts of good things. But what that really does is, from a designer's perspective, old school designers go, I'm a designer, I am very smart and I got it right. And then more progressive sort of way of thought, and everyone shouldn't just say designers, engineers and the business are pretty good with doing that as well. It's to try and say, this is my proposition, let's look at it. Now let's be critical and say, where are all the assumptions in this? And list them. So these are all the things that I have no validation for whatsoever, okay? If you need to deliver software, move ahead, but make sure that they're listed and tracked, and that you've got an experiment somewhere that will let you iterate on that. So by all means, move forwards, but make sure that you've got the analytics in place, make sure that you've got some testing or research in place so that you can improve that, because you want to get better and better and better and better. It's not just about building more and more and more features. One of my mentors described that as just as like building a house of cards. And I think as designers or architects, we want to design a grand vision. And the more we get into it, the more this magical thing in our head happens, and then you could do this and this and this, but the first assumption might be wrong. Is that helpful at all? Okay. Thank you.
I'm just going to ask if there's a question in our New Zealand or Parramatta offices. You could just unmute and ask any questions if there's any there. Not at the moment? Okay. Last question, and then if anybody has questions afterwards, I'm sure, Henry, you've got a few moments.
Mm-hmm.
So Henry, with a typical project team, we're used to having project managers, BAs, testers, developers, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
With a human-centered design approach, what does your typical team look like, and what's the skill set they would have?
Has all of that. Yeah. And for us, we'd have a UX designer and a visual designer as well. So, the whole idea is cross-functional team. The whole thing that I try and instill in everyone is that good ideas come from everyone. So when we have inception workshops or that sort of thing, the ideation, if you're a developer and you come up with a great concept, great visual design, great anything, then that's a great idea. There's no sort of like, it's a great idea, but look, you are an engineer, so, that's not your job. Settle down. That's our job. It's very important that we empower everyone towards that common vision, that destination statement. That's very important, that we all feel like we're moving in the same direction. So, so our design sessions include the BAs, testers, developers, architects, because often they're very close to the product as well. And in a startup environment, that's everyone, right? So I think probably something that stuck with me recently is that one of the ex-UX designers from Apple said that it wasn't like that there was any magical UX principle or practice in Apple. What there was a strong sense of design throughout the organization. So developers felt very passionately about the details of design as well. So through having that cut through the organization, you got the detail and the polish and everything. It wasn't because of some crazy fastidious overlord in the design capability, because you can't be across every little detail. Sorry?
A specialist human behavior element coming in? Because so far we've lacked that in prejudice.
Yes.
We want to look at it from a technical
Yes.
something like this, that is a pretty strong level skill set to have.
Yes. I'd have to say yes, otherwise I wouldn't have a job, right? So yes, very important, and you should pay them a lot. Yes. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah.
I'm going to ask us to just maybe pause there so we can wrap up, and if there's any further questions. But by way of close, the user experience or customer journey mapping and courses that are on offer at General Assembly, if anybody in this room wanted to, sign up online, there is an online offer. But could you tell us a little bit more about what the classroom-based program looks like, the after-work hour one, if anybody in this room might be interested to become better skilled on this process that you just shared with us. Can you just quickly close that part out? What does that look like? So
sure.
What does the program look like if you want to go to the classroom-based one?
For UX?
Yep.
So there are a variety of courses from the one-night courses if you wanted just to learn a little bit about a particular skill set. So I guess in terms of gradation, there's a one-night particular thing, so 2 hours, and there's things that run over 2 nights. So you might need a little bit of expansion on that. We're just looking at doing mobile as a 3-hour, I think. Prototyping goes over 2 sessions, wireframing. So you can pick off a little piece. Or then we've got, say, all-day sessions, like we just ran a Lean UX workshop one, so you go through the whole process over a day, which is quite good fun. Then you've got the 12-week course, which is twice a week. So that's getting a broader sense of the whole UX practice. And then there's a 10-week intensive course, so that's full-time. So you can sort of pick the level that you want to go. So the
full-time means you'd actually have to take time out of the office.
Yeah. So you'd probably, if you don't want to do that, then but you still want to get a full coverage, it would be the 12-week, twice a week at night. And if you just wanted to get a taste, I guess you just come along to the smaller ones. But if you're genuinely interested, I think the full-day ones, you kind of get a broader sense. What generally happens with UX is that people come in thinking it's going to be about screen design, and it takes them like an hour or two to go, haven't even drawn anything yet, and then they sort of get their sense of it.
So thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Henry, Phil and General Assembly. Quick promo, our next Amplify talk will be on the 16th of September at 12 o'clock. We'll have a gentleman who is looking after social responsibility at Google and the founder of Google Serve, which is how Google employees volunteer time to give something back to their community or society, sort of a little bit like Engineers Without Borders. His name is Seth Marbin, and he's actually going to be in Australia at the National Association of Volunteering Conference. So he's agreed to come and talk to us about how Google employees also enrich and inform their professional practice by, in fact, volunteering time to work on projects in the community. And that in itself develops empathy, it drives insights, and they kind of learn new innovation opportunities that they can bring back to their business by, in fact, volunteering. So please make sure, if you're interested, that you bookmark that time, 16th September. Thanks very much for joining us, and don't forget to sign up to the Amplify Festival newsletter if you're not already on it, and that's the way to get access to Front Row as a complimentary offer. Thanks very much for coming.